So I recently wrapped up a 30-second slot for Whoop, the fitness wearable with Olympian Bree Masters. This is how I shot the entire thing in under 2 hours. But first, let's check it out.
Milliseconds. That's the difference. Recovery, sleep, strain. Whoop tells me what my body needs when it matters most. The edge? It's in the details. Sleep better, train smarter, recover faster, and feel healthier. Whoop. Know your body, own your edge.
Now, I was blessed or cursed, depending on which way you look at it, to not have any brief for this one other than make something cool. Luckily, I've been wearing Whoop for about 2 years now, so I understand it pretty well. So this is where I started. So for those that don't know, Whoop is a fitness wearable, basically tracks everything from your heart rate to your skin temperature to your respiratory rate, keeping track on everything that you need to know throughout the day and throughout your sleep as well. Now, for this one, I knew that the interface is probably one of the coolest parts of the app and to how you see all the data and the metrics. So I knew that we wanted to somehow include that in the video somewhere. And I also knew that we wanted to take the viewer through a start to finish of one of Bree's track sessions. So from arriving at the track to the end of the session where you're collapsing on the ground. So I wanted this whole project to kind of mimic the feeling of a track session. So throughout the whole video, it is very stop, start, stop, start. So it's high intensity and then low intensity for all the resting periods as well. One of the quickest ways to do this is to actually find the right track. So I use lens distortions for this one to find a track, funnily enough, actually called Sprint, which has some really good high intensity sections and some really good low intensity sections that we can use to mimic that feeling of a track session. Now, it's not all the time that I start one of these projects with the track already picked out before we go into the shoot day, but I have noticed that whenever we do that, these projects always seem to fall together so much faster. So it's an important note for future. So diving straight into Milano, that's where I do all of my pre-production. So you can see in here, I've dropped in a bunch of frames from previous times that we've worked with Bree in the past. I've also dropped in a couple of different references, particular shots that I knew I wanted to replicate from past videos, and then also showing off a couple of the more UI focused things that we wanted to get in there. So this is a little notification that you get if you're at or over 90% recovery. Basically, we wanted this to kind of pop up on the screen just at the start of Bree's track session. So she kind of looks at this and she's like, oh, okay, so I'm recovered today, we better send it. I knew I wanted to include that sort of interface thing in there, from the peak day notification to the actual Whoop coach here, and then also to some little pop-ups happening kind of on the screen throughout the video, but wanted to include them in a way that was more than just having them pop up. So that's where we kind of introduced the idea of this snory cam look here as well, which I'll get into a little bit later, but we wanted to include that just for a slight point of difference to make it a little bit more interesting. I also knew all of the sounds that the Whoop make when you unclick it, like this. And I knew that all of that, like taking it off, adjusting the band, switching the band over, taking the battery off, would make for a really cool quick cut section right at the start of the video. So the idea with these is that it has a little battery clip that slips over the top, so you don't ever have to take it off to charge it. So it basically stays on 24/7. So with that, I knew if we get to the track, you take the battery off after you've been charging it in the morning, change the strap to a more sportier strap, like a silicone one, and that whole little section there would make for a really cool quick cut to kick off the action in the video. When it comes to the warm-up stuff here, I know that Bree generally has a lot of things that she likes to do every session anyway to make sure that she doesn't get hurt or she doesn't injure herself during the session. So a lot of that time is the time to kind of just sit back and just let her do her thing. And if I see anything cool, I'll get her to repeat it. The sprints here, it's always good to make sure the block starts, you get a bunch of different variations of those, and then all sorts of different running shots as well. I think it's just super important to have these laid out so that on the day, you just have something to go back to. You can just go tick, tick, tick. Yeah, I've got that, rather than just kind of going in blind and ending up forgetting a whole lot of stuff on the day. As we come towards the rest section here, you can see that I wanted there to be a little break in the video. So break where something like this little notification pops up saying how much strain you're at or something like that during the session. So that'll be a good little dip period in between rests. And then we kick up the intensity towards the end here, bring it home with a really strong finish, and then Bree consults the Whoop coach, which is a beta program within Whoop that kind of helps you with all sorts of things for training and recovery. So as we kick into the production day, we started with all of the device shots. So the band, the battery clip, everything like that while we were waiting for a little bit of color in the sky. So by the time we had finished those, it was time to get into some of the arrival at the track shots. So as I said, we kind of wanted to include an entire start to finish from arriving at the track to finishing the session. So we got some shots of Bree arriving in, dumping the bag onto the ground, which was always going to be the kicker to get into those little action shots where we're changing the band over. So there's kind of like that rise and build as she's arriving at the track. Dump the bag onto the ground, and then that kicks off the quick cut shots. Next thing is Bree's warm-up shots. So as I said before, Bree always has a set of exercises and drills and things like that she needs to do before we actually start working, which is really important because you don't want to make an athlete go into sprints or anything like that not warmed up, especially at that level, because they're just going to get hurt and it's going to be your fault. So during this time, it's really good to just stand back and watch and then just film as she's doing it. Usually if I see anything I really like, I'll get her to repeat it a couple of times, get it from a couple of different angles, but most of the time she knows what she has to do, so I just let her do her thing. So next was the changing of the shoes, which is another cool section that we would be using to create those quick cut sequences like shoes on, laces done up. Normally when athletes do shorter distances, they do it in spikes, but don't put the spikes on until just before they start. So we'd normally warm up with runners, switching into spikes before they start. Then we got straight into placing the blocks down. This is another good one because they create a lot of sound effects. So when you put the blocks in, when you stomp them into the track, all of those are really cool sound effects that you can use to, again, create that quick cut section in between the slower sections. So laying the blocks down, setting them out, and then getting the hands down on the ground, ready for the block starts. Those lining up the hands on the start line is another really good way to show off the actual device. So you ramp right up with the really quick cuts from laying the blocks down and then putting the hands down onto the ground, and that's where it really slows and you kind of build that anticipation into the actual starts. Now, when it comes to shooting block starts, this is where working with professional athletes, you need to be conscious of how much you're making them work. So especially with someone like Bree at her level, you don't want to be overworking them too much. So you really need to be selective and have a good plan in mind of what shots you want to get. Because if you start to overwork them, they're going to fatigue and then they'll probably end up hurting themselves again. And then we got into a couple of run throughs where not necessarily starting from the blocks, but still coming sort of full speed around the bend towards the camera. And then another really good one that I always like to do for super high energy, fast, quick cut sections is right in at 70 mil on the 24-70, running alongside Bree. So it's super shaky, super handheld. She can dial it back a little bit for these ones, like primarily A, so I can actually keep up with her, and B, so she's not draining herself too much on super fast, super high intensity the whole way through. From there, we go into some of the static resting shots. So this is going to be to bring the energy back down for some of the quieter sections and then allow us to bring some of those little UI pop-ups onto the screen, like the strain notifications and things like that. Another really good one is getting lots of track B-roll. So shooting straight down at the ground, and you can just run on the track and just shooting straight down at the ground. So you see the lines moving through, the details of the track. This is again really good for those super fast, super quick cut sections. Basically, one of the last ones that we did was we actually brought the electric skateboard out. Now, I love this thing, especially for running and especially when it comes to shooting on the track, because it's so good to get the really fast shots. Like when Bree's doing her run throughs, I can just be speeding alongside her, getting all sorts of detail shots. But again, you really want to be selective. Like there's only a few of these in the bank. You don't want to be repeating these again and again and again. So if you're confident that you got the shot, call it. Now, the last shot that we got of the day were these snorri cam shots. So basically what we've got here is two of these small rig magic arms just bolted together in the middle there, one clamp on the bottom of the phone, and then the 1/4 inch mounted into the bottom of the camera there like that. So this is what it looks like. You're essentially just bolted onto the bottom of the camera with the fixed angle of the phone in the middle there. It's a pretty cool effect. And again, it was only going to be going for a couple of seconds, but we just really wanted to come up with a cool way to incorporate that peak day notification that comes up, and then B, also introducing the Whoop coach in there. Okay. Again, just a different way of doing it. You didn't want to just have this static shot where it just pops up in the background. It's kind of boring. Plus also knowing that this was going to be cropped into 9:16 for her release on her socials. So you want to find a way to put it in the center of the screen without it kind of blocking anything. So here we are in post-production. The first thing that I always like to start with when it comes to post-production, after all the files have been consolidated and organized, is to get into selects. Now, I always find that the sooner you get stuck into your selects after the shoot, if possible, you'll find that the edit comes together a lot quicker because it's fresh in your mind. You know what you shot, you know what you didn't like, rather than letting it sit there for ages and you come back to it and you've basically forgotten everything. So the first thing I get stuck into here is basically just grouping in everything I shot on the A7 IV. So this was all of the snorri cam shots, and then these last couple of just static collapsing shots at the end here. And then from there, we basically just did the selects from the rest of the shoot. So we grouped them into different little sections here. So the first section is Bree walking into the track, and then she's walking in, dumping down her bag. And then this next section here is all of these little quick cut shots of taking the device off, switching the band over, all of those little sound effects heavy shots that will create those cool quick cut sections in the edit later. From there, we moved into a couple of these shots, which were ended up not used in the final edit, and then going straight into some of the warm up and stretching shots. Now, what I do when I do my selects is I usually lay them all out and put them into groups, and then I go back through them again when I'm starting to pull them into the timeline and pull all the shots that I like just up one track or color them so that I know it's like these are the selects of the selects pretty much. So you can see all of the warm up shots here, drills, getting ready for a session. And now we go back into changing shoes. So again, these like little lace ties, little moments like that where they pull down really fast, really great for quick cuts. Another little spot here as her heel slips into the shoe. Great little sound effects heavy sections that will create a cool quick cut. And then again, laying down these blocks here. So these sections here, like I was saying before, are really sound effects heavy, especially this moment here, which I love, is stomping the spikes of the blocks down into the track using the heel of her shoe. So we did that again there a couple of times. And then again, this one is the one that made it into the edit. Just that really hard stomp is such a cool sound effect. Again, more here, laying out the blocks, things like that. And then this is where the edit starts to slow down. So we'll come into laying out the hands on the track. And here we go. Yep, 1, 2. And then this one here was honestly probably one of my favorite shots from the shoot. It's a weird thing to have as a favorite shot, but it was just the way that her hand came into frame and the focus was already set, ready for the Whoop logo to just dump into frame there. And you can hear me just losing it from behind the camera. Yeah. Now from there, once we've done all of our selects, I usually start to make a bit of a rough timeline, and we'll usually always start with the track. So lay the track out. We knew this had to be a 30-second slot. So we lay the track out and cut it into different sections into how I like it. So in here, you can see starts with a bit of a build there. And what I've done is laid out some of the sections that I knew immediately as soon as I listened to the track and as soon as I laid out the track in the timeline, I knew where these sections were going to go. So for example, I knew I was going to have a couple of quick cuts at the start there. So I left a gap. Then here, Bree walking in as there's like this kind of riser from the track. Bree walking in, dumps the bag down, this little quick cut section. I knew that was going to go there. And then into the blocks as the track dives down again, that was a great opportunity to introduce this band shot here, the Whoop band. and then again into the block starts. I knew that I wanted the block starts to start as the track really ramps up. So I knew that's where that was going to go there. Back into another quiet section here. This is a great opportunity to slow the edit back down, let it breathe for a second, and then bring up that little UI notification in the background. Track ramps back up again. And then coming towards the end here, we knew this is where we wanted Bree to be just collapsing on the ground, exhausted after a session. And then that's where she types in to the Whoop coach how I'm going to recover from that one. And then that's the end of the video. So that's where we started. You basically just got the bones and the framework of it all happening here, just knowing already where those sections are going to go. Next was basically just filling in the rest of those gaps. So I had those sections that I knew where everything wanted to go. And then from there, I know the gaps that I need to fill. So going in, quick cut section at the start there, and then Bree entry shots in the middle. From here, stretching, block starts. And then once we had the actual block starts happening, we can start to introduce some of the actual action shots. This is where you really maintain the intensity in this part of the video here. And again, back into the slower sections, back up again, some more of the action shots there to bring us right across the finish line. Now, once we've done that, you can actually start to introduce some of the sound effects. So what I usually like to do with sound effects is maintain as much of the original sound effects as I can that were shot in camera. So, you know, as I said, those little clicks from the Whoop band, there's things like the tying of the laces in the shoes, there's the placing of the blocks down. If there's things in there that I can still use in the edit, I keep them in and then basically separate them into 2 tracks here. So everything that's still attached that is pretty much unusable for one reason or another stays on the top track, just muted. And then everything else that I want to use in the edit, I just move that down 1 track and then we can play with levels and all of that from there. Now, going in after that, you basically look to reintroduce all sorts of new sound effects. So when you finish with all of the in-camera sound effects, I bring in layers, usually from lens distortions and ocular sounds is where I get all of the quick cut sound effects. So especially in like this opening shot here. Now that's just like kind of cinematic mechanics type thing. Doesn't really relate to what's actually happening on screen, but it really helps kind of keep that energy going for the super quick cut sections here. So there's a couple of there. This is just a riser here that's like just building the tension up into this quick cut section here. This little click notification, that was just a good one to mimic the sound of the notification that we'll bring up when we animate that later. Again, some just like cracking of knuckles shots, things like that to kind of show that stretching, warming up. A few little whooshes in there as she's kind of warming up, doing her drills. And then this here, this sound effect is just kind of like a riser into a drop, and that kind of gives a little bit more gravitas to this Whoop logo shot. So you kind of build up and then it allows, you know, a second or two for it to breathe while you see the Whoop logo in the shot there. And then you have a little bit more of a quiet moment here as she's getting ready, and then another riser there and another drop as she takes off. And then this is, again, as you have these quick cut little frames in between some of the longer shots, that's where you introduce some of these whooshes and things like that. Same again here. And then again towards the back end of the track as there's those whooshes, the flybys, and then finally just the typing there as she's typing. We'll animate that later, but you just have the clicking of the keyboard sound. Now, one of the things that I like to do when doing sound effects is actually just going through and just muting your track. So I've got the track here in purple. It's good to just go through and listen to it without the track in there so that you know, you get a bit of a better feel on the sound effects a little bit better without listening to the music in there. Now, next we get into the voiceover from Bree. So again, a great opportunity here. If you turn off all of your other layers, just listen to the voiceover first, go through that, get your best sections, and then lay them out with enough room to breathe. There's nothing worse than listening to a video and it's just line after line after line and there's no opportunity to focus on anything else. So you want to give the edit room to breathe in between the voiceover so that, you have the track, you have the voiceover, and you have the sound effects, and each of them are complementing each other. They're not all trying to fight for what's going to sound the best or what's going to sound the loudest throughout the edit. So here we just had
Milliseconds.
Basically just had Bree's voiceover by itself.
Recovery, sleep, strain. Whoop. Know your body, own your edge.
Now, when it comes to editing voiceover, one of my favorite tools that I discovered in the last couple of months is the Adobe Podcast website. Now, generally, you want to start with good audio. That's always going to be a safe starting point, but you would be surprised the amount that this Adobe Podcast AI can clean up that audio. It's incredible. But usually what we would do is we'd just put something as simple as this, one of the DJI mics with the lapel, which is actually what I'm using today. You basically just lapel up like normal, record through the voiceover. She can just be sitting in there holding her phone, reading off it, and then feed that straight through the Adobe Podcast website. And it comes out sounding incredible. Like even just that by itself without any further tweaks would be an amazing starting point. What I usually like to do from there, once I have the output file from Adobe Podcast, is go through and I just have a preset that I've created that is just a voice preset. It just has dynamics processing, multi-band compressor, parametric equalizer. Just dump that straight in and it works almost every time flawlessly. I'm certainly not an audio engineer by any means, but I think it sounds pretty good. Another thing that you can do is when it comes to editing your tracks, if you haven't got any presets like that, you can use your audio tab in here and then highlight your tracks and come into dialogue and just go balance low tone voice. I never use the high tone voice. It always ends up sounding a little bit tinny. So the balanced low tone voice will clean the track up really nicely, boost the bottom end, remove any kind of like outstanding sounds. If you had a room that you were recording the voiceover in that wasn't that great or there was a bit of noise, it cleans that up really nicely. And so I usually do that over the top of this AI processor, the Adobe AI processor, and it just comes out really nicely. From there, you could basically just adjust levels and you'll be good to go. Now, after the voiceover, the next thing to do was to get onto creating these little notification animations. So this is what they look like. So these were super simple to do. Basically, I started with the clip coming in. I knew roughly how long it was going to be. All you do is I just motion tracked, and because we do have such a high contrast point here on the back of the iPhone, I just used that and then tracked rotation as well because the phone is kind of rotating a little bit. Use that and then the rotation and apply that to a null. And then the next thing is bringing in the little screenshot of the notification and then pinning that to the null. Now, the animation of this actual notification was super simple. So we've got two main points at the start here. So we've got the opacity comes up over whatever that is, 10 frames, nothing serious. And then we've got the position, same thing as well. So with the position, we've just used the graph editor here to make all of the movement happen at the start of those keyframes and then drop off. And then that's the start of it. And then basically the next part is as Bree brings up the phone like this, the camera racks focus from the back of the phone to her face to kind of get that reaction. It's like, oh, it's peak day. I'm 90%. I can train hard today. Like, okay, let's go. So you rack focus from the phone to Bree's face to get that kind of little nod, that little smile. So basically, as we're racking focus here, we want to mimic that same effect with the notification. So again, we've just got a little Gaussian blur just over a few frames like that, and then also dropping the opacity slightly so that you can see through it and see Bree's face a little bit better. Now, the same thing is for this animation towards the end here as well. And again, it's super simple. just got the motion track to the back of the phone, put that onto a null, and then have that within the pre-comp position and pairing that pre-comp to the null. And that's just to limit any kind of movement of the phone where the notification isn't matching that. Now we've got, again, basically just the opacity comes up over a few frames, over 10 frames, and the position comes up over those same 10 frames as well to kind of just add in a little bit extra. And then again, we've just got a motion blur to kind of like accentuate that. Now the final one was this one here, which is pretty simple. So there's two things happening here at the same time. So the little strain notification, which basically measures where your strain is at or how hard you're working for that day. Now, this is just kind of showing Bree's halfway through her session. Her strain is kind of starting to get up there. So we've got the keyframe of it moving up into the frame. And then we've also got a mask moving down over the top of it. So you can see here that the mask is dropping down as the notification is popping up. So here's what that looks like. I've basically got a white solid and I've just got a mask over the top of the white solid with a feather on it. What do we got? The feather's at 109 pixels. Basically, you've got the mask drops down as the notification pops up. So again, this is just happening over 10 frames. Now, I didn't actually have to animate this strain thing here. This is something that Whoop supplied me. So that just took off a little bit of time, which was great. But then again, you've just got mask goes down, notification goes up. And that's it for all of the animations. So basically the last thing left to do here was introduce subtitles, make sure it's all within the brand's fonts. And then we also look at the color as well. So I'm really not much of a colorist. I never have been. It's always been super simple for me. All I do is basically I start with a Rec 709 conversion LUT. Now Sony actually has one of these that you can download off the Sony website. It's pretty good. There's lots of other brands that make them. I like to use these Phantom LUTs, which I'll link in the description below. They are amazing. They're kind of designed to mimic the look of an ARRI. So it'll take you from S-Log 3 to Rec 709 whilst mimicking the look of the ARRI cameras. From there, you've got your conversion, any adjustments to temperature or tint or anything like that or exposure, I will usually do on the clips themselves. So that all just kind of happens individually. And then the color and the conversion happens on these adjustments layers. So I like to use the Danny Gewirtz LUTs. They are killer. They're just, again, just simple, clean. They're not over the top. They don't really change the hues too much of what's happening in frame. You can always drop the effect down. I usually like to sit it around anywhere between sort of 30 to 40, I find is kind of the sweet spot for those, but just simple and clean without being too over the top. Last thing that is left to do is because these are a blue and orange LUT, a lot of the time you will find that they introduce sometimes a little bit too much blue into the shadows, especially when it comes to shots like this where you have a lot of actual black in the shadows. So one of the easiest things to do here is use your HSL secondaries and you can just highlight the colors. So you can see obviously like the blue is showing up a lot in the blacks, which is not amazing if you don't like that. So I basically just try and select those as best as I can without selecting too much else. Apply a bit of a feather on the edge there, and then you can just desat that a little bit just to take those blacks back to an actual black rather than that really saturated blue. From there, all that's left to do is go through, reassess colors on every shot. I like to do, once I've done my colors, I'll take a bit of a break from colors and then focus on sound effects and levels and everything like that. And then you come back to the colors, even take a break, come back to the colors with a fresh set of eyes, reassess, and then do all of those fine tweaks. And then that's basically it from there. So exporting in whatever different formats they have requested. So for this one, they were mainly operating in 9x16 and 4x5. The 16x9 was pretty much just for me. I don't think anybody's going to use that. To be honest, nobody's really going to see it except for me anyway. And then from there, when it comes to export, these are my export settings. So in video, if it's 4K, just make sure we're matching the source, rendering at maximum depth and using maximum render quality. And then I'll usually do VBR 2 pass. Now, honestly, the difference between 1 pass and 2 pass is actually insane. I didn't even realize that this made that much of a difference until someone showed me, and it blew my mind. So VBR 2 pass, it obviously takes a little bit longer, but the result is way worth it. When it comes to actual bit rate, you don't really need to be going anything too high, especially if it's just for socials. The higher the bit rate, the more it's just going to get crushed anyway. So I like to keep it pretty low. 15 to 25 is usually my go-to for whatever reason. I just found that kind of works for me. Even 15 to 20 or 10 to 15 if you're going something a little bit lower. The last thing that's left to do is this QT gamma compensation LUT. So what happens when you export something is you often find that when you're looking back at the render, it kind of sucks a bit of the contrast out of it. Like it lifts the shadows, it lifts the blacks. Now, this QT gamma compensation LUT is basically, as the title suggests, compensates for that. So it basically just brings those blacks back down to how you intended them to look when you did the colors. So that's pretty much it. That was a 30-second slot. We shot that in 2 hours, just Bree and myself. This was a really fun project. I loved it. The Whoop team were all super stoked with it. Bree was obviously very happy with it. And just in general, a great project to be working on at the end of the year for fun. I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. This is my first time doing this. Hopefully it wasn't too painful to watch. If you have anything else that you want to see in the future, let me know and I'll see you in the next one.